Like a backstage pass to the world of fly fishing travel, this is Waypoints, the podcast of destination angling. News and events, helpful travel tips, destination profiles, great stories, and expert advice from some of the most seasoned and experienced names in fishing travel. Waypoints is presented by Yellow Dog Fly Fishing, the industry's #1 specialty travel company and the fly shop for the world of fly fishing. Freshwater or saltwater, international or domestic, Yellow Dog has you covered for your next fishing adventure. And now your host, author, photographer, and world traveler, Jim Klug.
Welcome to Waypoints, the podcast where we explore the destinations, stories, and issues that matter most to the world of fly fishing. In September of 2023, an article appeared in the New York Times that would have a huge impact on Montana's Big Hole River and the entire Jefferson Valley watershed. The article was titled, "Zombie Trout Unsettle Montana, Long a Fly Fishing Mecca." The headline of the Times piece proclaimed that, quote, warming waters and other factors along the state's rivers, like the Big Hole, appear to be contributing to alarmingly low numbers of the state's renowned rainbow and brown trout, end quote. The Times' lengthy and high-profile article described a significant decline in wild trout populations, particularly rainbows and browns, in several southwest Montana rivers, including the Big Hole, Ruby, and the Beaverhead. It went into detail about how warming temperatures, diminishing snowpack, drought, reduced river flows, disease, pathogens, overuse, and environmental stress had all combined to create a crisis for Montana's native and wild trout populations. The fishing guides, lodge owners, and biologists that were quoted in the article talked about diseased, blind, and fungus-afflicted fish, dubbed zombie trout, and collectively called for immediate action to address the situation. The decline threatened not only Montana's angling economy and culture, but also the long-term sustainability of one of the last wild trout fisheries in the U.S. West. The 2023 Zombie Trout title stuck, and what followed was a long season of concern and panic about the state of trout, not only on the Big Hole, but all throughout the region. As expected, the lodges, fly shops, guides, and outfitters that operated on the Big Hole, Beaverhead, Ruby, and Jefferson were hit hard. Now fast forward 2 years after the original New York Times article to February 2025, when Fly Fisherman magazine released a follow-up article titled, Big Hole Update, 2024 Research Finds Healthy Trout. Now, this article provided what could be called an optimistic update on the trout populations in Montana's Big Hole, citing significant improvements shown in 2024 studies conducted by Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. These findings suggested that while challenges remained, the Big Hole River's trout populations were indeed showing signs of recovery. And now here we are in 2025, and in Montana, the overall situation remains, a bit confusing, as diverse and oftentimes contrary opinions and positions as to the health of the watershed remain. A good deal of the information being released and shared seems to conflict and vary depending on which article you read about the Big Hole or who you talk to. Some will tell you that when it comes to fish numbers and the overall health of these area resources, the sky is still falling, while others are adamant that things are good and getting better. So in this episode, we're once again addressing and discussing a topic that has sparked national attention and created very real problems for so many Montanans that link their livelihoods and their recreation to these rivers. You may be listening to this intro and asking yourself, why should I care? Well, if you're an angler that is concerned about the future of our cold water resources, wild trout populations, and the very places our sport depends on, then you will indeed want to pay attention to what we're about to cover. Our conversation today, and the questions I plan to ask my guests, are designed to facilitate an honest discussion on the current state and future of the Big Hole and surrounding waters. I am hoping they will share their insights, recent findings, and of course their opinions, allowing us to bridge science, policy, and emotions to emerge with a better understanding of what the real situation is. We're going to talk about the current state of these well-known Southwest Montana fisheries. We'll discuss what's changed, what's working, what's improved, and what still needs to happen. And ultimately, we'll get them to share their thoughts on the future of wild trout fishing in Montana. I'm joined today by two people who are very close to this issue. My first guest is Jim Olsen, the Fisheries Biologist for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks in the Big Hole River Basin. Jim has been with FWP for 23 years and working on the Big Hole for the past 17 years. He previously worked in Columbus, Montana on the Yellowstone, Stillwater, and Boulder rivers, as well as throughout the Beartooths. Jim has an undergraduate degree from Utah State and a master's from the University of Vermont. My second guest is Eric Thorson, co-owner of Sunrise Fly Shop in Melrose, Montana. This is Eric's 20th year of owning the fly shop and guiding on the Big Hole River. Originally from Washington, Eric has a bachelor's degree in wildlife biology from Washington State University. In addition to guiding and running the fly shop, Eric is a board member of the Big Hole Watershed Committee and a member of the Big Hole Drought Management Plan Subcommittee. We'll be right back with Jim Olsen and Eric Thorson after a quick word from our sponsor. Waypoints is sponsored by Patagonia. To bring their gear to life, Patagonia is motivated by relentless curiosity and a passion for the wild. They evaluate hundreds of materials, build dozens of prototypes, and spend seasons punishing them in the world's most extreme conditions. The work is the guide, and Patagonia never tires of exploring, learning, and improving. Be sure to check out Patagonia's new Swift Current waders, repatterned and redesigned for bulk reduction, reduced seam stress, increased maneuverability, and improved repairability. Made from recycled materials without intentionally added PFAS, Swift Current waders move better in and out of the water. Jim Olsen and Eric Thorson, welcome to Waypoints. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate you guys being here.
Well, thank you for having us. This is great.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. Eric, I want to start off. We have to begin by having you guys summarize and explain what is and what has been going on the Big Hole and the Jefferson Valley. For those listening that may be unfamiliar with the developments of the past few years, tell us about the issues going on in southwest Montana. Why is this a big deal?
Well, what we've really been seeing is a population decline in the wild trout we have in the Big Hole, and trying to figure out what's causing it and what the root causes of that are. And it's not something that just started last year, 2023. It's been going on for a while, and we've been seeing different events here and there. And it's not just one river; it's a region.
So it became big news in 2023, and I want to talk about that in just a second. But Jim, let me ask you a question. There are probably people from outside of Montana, or maybe they don't fish the Big Hole. They're listening to this and they're thinking to themselves, why should I as an angler care about what is happening on the Big Hole River, right? Like maybe I don't fish there. It's not my backyard. Why is this such a significant issue with ramifications well beyond, say, the Big Hole or the Jefferson Valley?
Yeah, I think the declines that we've seen recently, while they might, they're happening in times where we thought according to how we understand our fisheries work, we should have been going in the opposite direction. We should have been improving. We had good water years, and normally when we have good water years, our fisheries improve, our numbers of fish increase, and we're having good water years, and our numbers of fish were going down. And it wasn't just like Eric said, it wasn't just in the Big Hole. We were seeing the same trends in the Beaverhead and the Ruby Rivers. All of southwest Montana was experiencing these same sort of issues, and they were occurring at times when, for us, we would expect the population to be heading in the opposite direction, to be improving. And so it was happening, and we didn't have a good explanation as to why it was happening. So why that matters to other people is probably that. Like usually we have a pretty good idea of what drives our fisheries, and in this case we didn't, and we're still trying to get that part of it figured out.
So this is a problem that is not new, yet I think to a lot of anglers and to a lot of the world, it seems as if this all of a sudden became a big issue in 2023. And there was a reason for that. There was a specific event that sparked such widespread concern and I would say national attention. Eric, tell us what happened in 2023 that put this on the radar for so many people.
Well, the big thing that happened was the New York Times article. And an article within the headline said zombie fish. And everybody freaked out. and there were pictures of fish with some kind of fungus or something on them, and it just took off. And we started getting calls at the fly shop. Oh my God, the river's dead. What's going on? What's going on? And people that had booked were calling saying, are we still okay to go? Do you have any trout left in the river? And it scared everybody. And there was some really important data that they were explaining, like Jim's research. Yeah, there is population decline. But there was also a sensationalism aspect of it that just scared the hell out of everybody.
And the zombie trout title, of course, gets people's attention. Leave it to a national, newspaper to come up with something really sensationalistic. But Jim, let me ask you. I mean, this hit in 2023 with that New York Times article, but this was obviously not a situation that materialized overnight, as you were saying. So explain to our listeners how this so quickly became an issue. But in turn, as you said, this had been going on for years with kind of the ups and downs of the population numbers of trout in these particular fisheries.
Yeah, so we monitor the fishery every year through our electrofishing surveys. We create population estimates, and we've been doing those since the late 60s. So we have one of the largest data sets in the country really to draw off of to look at these sorts of trends. And typically in the past, they've followed water. So when we have what I mean by that is the Big Hole in particular, there's no dams on it. It's a freestone river. And so all the water we get is just the water that falls and it goes out. And so in good snow years and good water years, we would typically see a subsequent increase in the population. So for the next couple of years, the population tends to increase. And in 2011, which was our last really, really good water year in this part of the state, for the next 3 or 4 years after, the population increased and was higher than it had ever been. And then in 2014, we saw a big die-off in the fall related to brown trout spawning. And so we had lots and lots of fish, puts lots and lots of fish close together, a really, really warm fall, and all of a sudden we had a lot of brown trout dying during the spawn. And but then the fishery it recovered fairly quickly in the next couple of years after that. And then we had really good water years. And then in 2018, 2019 were good water years, and 2017 too. And then, but the fishery was declining during that time period, and so we didn't understand why that was, and so that part was the alarming part. And then we started to see when the fish died in 2014, we saw a lot of fungus on those fish, but that's normal. If you go to Alaska and if you fished, you see those fish that are spawning and they get that fungus on them. That's typical. That's a very stressful time period for fish. But then we started seeing these lesions on their head, like between their eyes, which we'd never seen before, and also at a time of the year when we'd never seen anything like that before, like in June. There's plenty of water, temperatures are great, everything, food's abundant, the best time of year for fish, and we're seeing these weird things start to pop up in both the trout and the whitefish. And that's where the whole zombie trout thing, I hate that word, by the way.
We all do.
I can't stand it. Started showing up, and we just never seen that before. And trying to figure out what that was, and even if it had any impact, Eric and I were talking about this morning, that fish are like people. There's always somebody sick somewhere. It's not like that the disease doesn't exist for wild animals. It does. We just don't see it that often. But fish, in some cases, you do, especially like this external lesion that we're seeing on their foreheads. And so that we started seeing, and we'd never seen that before. And so just trying to understand what that was, and like I said, if that actually has an effect on the overall population of fish.
Were you seeing that prior to the 2022-2023 season? Was this going all the way back to like 14?
No, we didn't see it then. So it's kind of, it's also kind of one of those things that you see what you look for too. And we'd never noticed it before, but we'd never really looked that close. It's only when we started to see them in 2018 or whenever that time period, 2016 to 2018, we started seeing that before. We're like, well, that's kind of weird, and that's all we thought about it at first. Well, that's kind of odd. I've never seen anything like that. But then you start seeing more and more fish like that. You start to wonder, well, what's going on, and could that be affecting the fish? And So that was something that was one of those ideas that could be, what is causing the population decline. We don't know that yet for sure, but it's one of those things that we were considering as one of the hypotheses that might be affecting the fish.
So what's the term for the fungus that occurs naturally?
So it's saprolegnia.
Saprolegnia. And you just talked about the spawning salmon in Alaska. This is basically a stress-induced fungus that can occur naturally. It can be natural causes. It can be man-made causes, but it's a stressor, essentially, that creates it, which is certainly what salmon are experiencing when they're spawning. They're racing up the rivers in Alaska. They're doing it once, and they're going to die. And that's why if you have fished Alaska and you're walking the banks, you see these fish that are basically starting to decay. Yeah. And that's a natural occurring deal.
Yeah.
But what you were seeing with the legions was something completely different.
Yeah, it's completely different. It was, and at a time of year where we wouldn't expect it. You're right. Like that saprolegnia fungus is generally a secondary infection. So that fish is weakened due to something else, whether that's spawning or it's sick due to something else, and then that saprolegnia then can take a hold on that fish and cause what we see externally. But rarely does it happen on a healthy fish. It's just able to fight that off. But it is everywhere. It's in springs that come out of the water. You can detect saprolegnia. It's a ubiquitous fungus that's everywhere all the time. And but it's generally a secondary infection that affects the fish.
Do you guys have a term for the new development that you were seeing?
We call it head necrosis.
Head necrosis, gotcha.
Not zombie fish.
Zombie fish. Head necrosis sounds. But
better. We're still trying to figure out what it is, and so we've been able to collect some samples. Actually, a lot of people. We have a person that's just dedicated to that now. Like if somebody sees a sick fish, because it's really critical. From the pathological side to collect a live fish. Once they've been dead, decomposition happens so quick that it's really difficult to tell the cause of disease. And so we have a person who's dedicated to that now. If somebody sees a sick fish, they can call him and he'll come out and find it. If they catch one, they're able to keep it alive. He'll come out and get it from them to be able to get those samples from those fish.
To better study that.
Right, exactly. Yeah. We're able to get better samples. And we've been able to get some really good samples the last couple of years and have really top-notch people from across the country who are helping us try to figure out what that is. So. And
are you seeing this head necrosis only in the Big Hole, or is it other area rivers?
Yeah, we've seen it in the Beaverhead as well, and in the Ruby. I'm not aware of any other rivers, but I don't know if people are looking that close for it too.
That's a good point you brought up. It's like you kind of find what you're looking for.
Right.
And so if there's thousands of fish per mile in other western rivers, it may exist, but people just aren't really paying attention to it.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Gotcha. Well, back to the Big Hole specifically. Eric, let me ask you this. Talk to us about the impact that the press event of 2023 had on the local economy of the greater Jefferson Valley, not just commercial guiding, but other businesses such as restaurants and motels. Go back to this time in 2023 and describe to us a little bit about the fallout from the zombie fish article.
And like I said, we started getting calls at the shop as soon as the article came out. We would get emails from some of our clients and customers saying, hey, have you seen this? What's going on? And the word was getting out. Everybody was talking about it. And then the cancellations for us started. People that were talking about booking were calling us and saying, well, I think we're going to go up to the Missouri instead. And I have an email from a client. He's like, this is no reflection on you. I just can hear that it's full of dead fish. I don't want to come do this. Good luck. I hope the best for you guys. And then you start seeing fewer and fewer people and foot traffic in the local bars, reservations at local motels, the fly shop itself, other businesses in the valley. Every business owner I've talked to said, we started seeing a decline in 23 right away. And then that decline amplified last year. And 2024 was really tough on everybody. And every owner that I've spoken with said that they saw not just a couple percentage point declines. I mean, massive declines. And it was tough. It was the least amount of people I've seen come to Melrose to go fishing in a really long time.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people that maybe fish as a hobby or it's something they do once or twice a year, they don't realize how significant it is to the economy in Montana and specifically to some of these regions. I mean, it is a big deal that isn't just guides, outfitters, and fly shops. I mean, it is everything. It is a whole network that impacts these communities in these regions.
Yeah, if you look at the whole valley, I mean, you go the whole Jefferson Valley, you got Dillon, even up towards Butte, which is on the other side of the divide, but it's still impacted by the rivers we have nearby. Tourism is a big deal. I mean, you've talked on a lot of your podcasts about the numbers that tourism drive to the economy. Melrose has got 100 people. It's not like we're some massive industry where we can do a whole lot of other things. You're either a cattle rancher or you're in the fishing industry. There's not a lot of in between.
Well, the news comes out in 2023. You're starting to feel the impact into 24. People all over the state, and especially in the Valley, really kind of begin to lose their minds about this and the impact. And there's a public outcry for the state of Montana to do something. So, Jim, tell us what happens next at that point.
We didn't have very good answers. We have data that show us where the population was at, but not very good answers as to why we were seeing what we were seeing. And so, our department, through the governor's support of he came down a couple of times and met with people and that sort of thing too. We initiated some studies to help us to better understand these things. Working through Montana State University. They hired 3 PhD students. One of them focused on the recreational side of things, being like fishing pressure, what's going on there, and that sort of thing. And then a second person who is working on an adult mortality study, so the factors that are affecting whether an adult fish survives. And then a third one who's working on a juvenile fish study, which is helping us to understand the factors that are affecting the reproduction of those fish. So where are those fish coming from in the big hole? Are they coming from the main stem? We know we have a lot of spawning that goes on in the main stem because of red counts, but the big hole has lots and lots of tributaries too, and we don't understand how important those tributaries are to the river fishery. How many of our fish are going up into those tributaries spawning, and how many of those fish are coming back to the river and contributing to the fishery in the river. So understanding those things will help us to then come up with management strategies to get us out of where we're at, because we're still low. Like our numbers are still pretty low. We've improved a little bit the last couple of years, and our numbers this year show we stayed about the same, but we're low now. Probably more so because of water than anything else. We had one average water year in 2023, which for us seemed like a really good year because there'd been 2 or 3 bad years right before that, and but it was average, and the population almost doubled in 1 year, mostly due to small fish. Good water equals good reproduction and good juvenile fish production. And so when I talk about small fish, when we see them in our electrofishing surveys, the first time we see them, they're age 2. They're 2-year-olds in the spring, and so they're between 8 and 12 inches long. And so we saw good numbers of those in 2023, and that 2024, and that translated into pretty good numbers of this year. Now they're 13 to 15 inches. That's the most abundant size class of fish in the big hole right now is that 13 to 15 inch range.
That's a good indicator. I mean, you want those classes to be healthy, and that's what leads to big fish down the road.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Having consistent reproduction is really the key to the fishery in the big hole. We always joke that fishermen care about catching big fish, and we care about little fish. We want that's what the future is, I guess.
Well, it's interesting to see what the news was that came out in 2023. And Eric, back to your point of, the calls and the cancellations. Here we are basically 2 years later. FWP just came out with a new study in the last couple weeks where it seems like things went from, okay, it's all bad in 2023. Maybe that wasn't the case, but that was certainly the public perception. To now we get this new study and things have shifted to, well, it's pretty good. We're seeing pretty decent numbers. My question to you guys, is it actually possible for the trout population, if you look at that new study, versus the news that was coming out in 2023 to rebound and recover in such a short period of time. Explain to us, Jim, if you would, how this works. And I know you said it gets back to classes and certain sizes of fish, but can you have swings that actually occur that quickly where you're like, you know what, 2 years ago we were a little more worried. Now we're pretty optimistic about what we're seeing.
Yeah. So, and really what that's driven by is the capability of the fish to reproduce. So one female brown trout that's 14 inches long has 2,000 eggs. And so in 1 year, if the survival rate of those is really, really low, we just don't see those fish when they're age 2 years later. So we see them 2 years later, finally. If the factors that happened in those 2 years lead to poor survival, it doesn't take much of a difference in poor survival when you have 2,000 eggs to go from a lot of fish to not very many fish. And so when there's 2,000 eggs, a tenth of a percentage difference means a doubling of the population because there's so many eggs that you start with. So it doesn't take much of a change in survival rate of those small fish to produce a doubling of the population. And for us, when we see populations double like that, that's not uncommon. And what it means is a really, really strong age class of age 2 fish. So there's lots and lots of 8 to 12 inch fish, and they can literally double in a year the numbers that are out there, because every year, more or less, we have the same number of eggs. Our red counts kind of show this. We have almost the same number of reds every year. It goes up and down a little bit, but there's not a doubling and a halving sort of thing. Even during this decline, we saw a relatively same number of reds. So if you can just increase the survival of that, it can explode the population in the next year. And that's what we see when we have really good water, is that we have really good survival of those little fish, and it can double the population. To a fisherman, you're thinking like, wow, there's a whole bunch more fish here. Well, there are, but they're all little, so it's all relative.
But you got to have that.
Exactly. Yeah. And once they're past that age 2-year-old, it seems like mostly their survival is pretty good. We've only seen those major die-offs in 2014 and 2015 of adult fish. Once they're past that size, really there's not a whole lot that eats them. Because they're too big for most fish to eat them. And same thing for most predatory birds; they're getting too big to lift that. For an eagle to carry that fish out of the water, sort of a thing. So their mortality rate goes way down, but their mortality rate in those smaller age classes are really, really, really high.
I think that's really fascinating, because there might be a mindset, there certainly has been with me, that when you talk about a decline of the fishery or a recovery of the fishery, for some reason I just have it in my head that it takes years, right? It's a very slow process, but it's fascinating what you were just saying. It doesn't take that long. It's all about those classes and the survivability of the eggs, of reproduction. It's pretty fascinating that it can happen so quickly.
Yeah, the other thing about that too is, unlike salmon, our trout can spawn and they don't die. So, an 18-inch fish can spawn this year, and it can spawn next year too. So that's what I mean. There's not a delay. Like in some salmon fisheries, there is more of a delay because they spawn once and they're done. So you have to wait that whole another 3 or 4 years till those fish go out to the ocean and come all the way back before you see that bump in the next generation. Well, we don't see that because our fish can spawn multiple times. Too. So that's the other thing that contributes to that as well.
Well, one thing that's interesting is that there is so much emotion that goes into the issue of the health of our rivers. I'm not just talking about the Big Hole or the Jefferson Valley. That's all Western rivers. I mean, that applies to the Upper Madison, applies to the Missouri. It certainly applies to rivers in Colorado and Utah and Idaho. But there's so much emotion that goes into it, right, on the health of these rivers. And Eric, when it comes to this particular issue in the Big Hole and in the Valley, it seems like there are still a number of differing opinions as to the overall health of the system. And you can listen to different podcasts. You can read, different articles. And again, as we said back in the intro, some people are like, oh, it's still all bad. The sky is falling. And then you talk to people that, like yourselves, that are guiding out on these waters every single day during the season. You are completely connected to that resource, through your anglers and through fishing yourself. Why is it that there are still different ends of the spectrum when everybody's still, kind of focusing on the realities of the same resource? Why do we have these wild swings of opinions on this?
I mean, I really don't know. Part of it, I think, is the article and the sensationalism. Everybody's like, oh my God, this is so bad. And then There's people that are out there and like, hey, I'm catching fish every day when I'm guiding. It's fine. It's fine. You got to look at some data, and we got to look at these population numbers. That gives us the most accurate tell of what's going on in the river. Can we still catch fish? Absolutely. Has fishing been great? Yeah. Are the fish healthy that we're catching? Sure. There's still a decline. We still got to keep an eye on that. We can't just say, well, I caught 5 fish today. It was slow. They're all dying. Or I caught 40 today. This is amazing.
It's back.
Yeah.
Right.
You got to look at it in its totality. You got to look at the numbers. And why there's a disconnect, I don't really know. But I know that, like myself, my staff, and a lot of the people I talk to, yeah, we're concerned. 100%. The health of this fishery is our livelihood. And having a future fishery for future generations, that's the most important thing. The trout are the most important thing. The resource is the most important thing. But I don't know why there's that disconnect.
It seems like it's out there. But one of the things from the recent study, and Jim, I'll kick this back to you, numbers were up, things were, vastly improved. But one of my biggest takeaways when I read this is you guys weren't finding, it's like, okay, yes, fish numbers are up and you're catching fish, but there weren't diseased fish. I mean, of the numbers that were brought in and sampled, it was shockingly low of the fish that were impacted by some of the diseases.
Yeah, So this has started more recently. Unfortunately, I wish we had some more long-term data on this. But as we saw these problems starting to come up, then we started looking more closely. We started taking runs through and actually just specifically looking for disease. And that's what we've seen since we've started looking really close, is that particularly this last year, in 2024, we saw a few fish, not very many. But this year, 2025, we saw hardly any fish. Less than 1% of fish had any sort of anything wrong that you would say is, other than a perfectly healthy fish, you would say. And we looked, even in the fall last year, we always see some fungus brown trout. That's just part of the stress
induced.
Exactly, the stress of spawning. And we didn't find a single one last fall. Not a single brown trout had any fungus at all on it, and which was good, except for we're trying to catch those fish so we can find out what the disease is that's going on there, but we found none. So, similar sorts of things this spring. We looked at every single fish we caught, which is almost over 2,000 fish, between the 4 sections that we monitor on the big hole, and the rate is way low, less than 1% that we saw of any sort of noticeable disease, something that we would call disease. We always see fish that are, it's a hard life for a fish, that are beat up from, we think, from ice or from other things that are coming down the river. So they have wounds on them, or you can tell, like in the eagles, pick that one up, you can see the claw marks rip through its back, sort of a thing, and it dropped it. But as far as disease go, we just don't see, we haven't seen the last couple of years on the big hole in particular much sign of disease. We saw quite a bit more on the beaverhead this last fall and again this spring, we're not really sure what's going on there, other than that the beaverhead numbers have improved much better than the big hole has. The big hole and the ruby. The big hole and ruby are still below their long-term averages, but the beaverhead is at or above average. And so that might be a factor playing into that as well, is a density sort of thing. Just like we did in COVID, the closer you are to other people, the more disease spreads too. So if there is something like that going on, that might be a possible explanation as to why we're only seeing it in the beaverhead this last year and not seeing it in other places.
And you guys are doing these studies both pre-spawn and post-spawn, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. We do. We do a run in September, and then we do a run in November for the big hole. And that's pre-spawn for brown trout, and then after most of them are done.
So you guys have been monitoring this for years. The numbers going up and down, obviously, since the studies began. Let me ask you this, Eric. I mean, the 2023 article obviously is what put this kind of on the national radar for so many people. A lot of anglers started paying attention to this. Obviously, it wasn't good for businesses, wasn't good for bookings. But overall, did this national attention that hit, do you think it helped or hurt the overall conservation conversation? Did it make more people aware of, the importance of, cold water, of water flow, of other conditions that are so crucial to the health of trout populations and these resources? And I'm not just talking about the Big Hole, I'm talking about Western rivers in general.
Yeah, I think it definitely put it in the forefront of people's minds. They were talking about it a lot more. It brought conversations within organizations that had already been doing work and amped up those conversations, like the Big Hole Watershed Committee. And when we're on the drought subcommittee meetings and the conversations that Jim and I would have and Pedro and all these other people, it definitely amped those up. But it's not like we hadn't been talking about conservation. There we go. We were constantly doing these, and these conversations weren't new to us. I think it was just new to more of the general public, more to the fishing population that was coming out, the recreators. I mean, you guys with the FWP and the Watershed Committee, the amount of projects that have been done in the last 10 years, I mean, that's 100% the primary focus. And so for those groups, they'd always been doing it. I think just the knowledge about that and the other public kind of joining in amped up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the rainbow and brown trout populations, which of course in Montana are all wild trout, and I think that's important to mention because if people are listening from out of state, they might not realize that in Montana we don't stock fish in the rivers. It is wild trout populations. So the rainbows and the browns, they get a lot of attention in these studies, and most of the news has revolved around these two species. That said, the Big Hole is the last stronghold for native Arctic grayling in the lower 48, which is a really big deal. Let's talk for a moment about grayling populations and those numbers in this watershed.
Sure. Yeah. Just like trout have historically done, the grayling numbers go up and down with water. And so in the last few years where we've been more in a drought sort of situation, they've declined a little bit, but what we would expect during a drought. And so they're actually doing fairly well. Their long-term average is almost double what it was, 15 years ago as far as their total population size. So the grayling are doing pretty well. Like I said, they declined slightly, but what we'd expect during a drought sort of situation. They don't seem to have been affected like we've seen the trout do, with a significant sort of decline. So the grayling are doing okay. They're not everywhere, which is why they're in trouble. So they're not like there's grayling all over the place. But total population wise, they're steady. They're doing okay. And the overall trend through time is improving actually. So it's not just that they're declining, they're improving.
Yeah, this spring we've seen a good amount. In fact, just yesterday our staff got 2. And so, I mean, it's not something where you're catching 4 or 5 a day. And then people call us and ask and say, I want to catch a grayling. How do I target a grayling? I'm like, well, it's not quite like that. We can take you to the section that has the most of them. We can go fish those areas and just hope. But it's not something we can target. But we do catch a fair amount of them.
Yeah, and I mean, again, this isn't just a wild fish. This is a native fish.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool that they're there.
The last native in the lower 48. The last river with native grayling in the lower 48.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It is cool. It's one of the cool, unique things about the Big Hole is, and really you could catch one anywhere. We see most of them in the upper sort of river, but we've caught them all the way down near Twin too. So you can catch them anywhere.
Yeah. My guide Andy yesterday got one, and he said it was about 15 inches, really good size, really good fin. Where most of them are probably like, what would you say, like 10 to 12?
Yeah. 15-inch grayling is a big grayling.
Yeah, that's a big grayling.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, we've been talking about kind of the culprits and leading causes of some of these diseases and some of these problems, heat, water withdrawals, that kind of thing. But I don't think you can have an honest and realistic conversation about the overall health of a fishery or watershed without talking about environmental and climate stressors. I mean, that's clearly a factor in the Jefferson Valley and in so many watersheds throughout the U.S. West, right? I mean, whatever your politics may be, it's hard to argue that climate change is affecting water in these area rivers. I mean, it's just happening. I mean, it impacts winter snowpack. It impacts spring runoff. That, of course, dictates flows. It dictates water temperature. And all of these things are going to have an impact on fish populations, without question. I mean, one thing that's kind of interesting when it comes to climate change, I mean, you can say, well, we don't agree what the causes of climate change are, but it's really hard to argue that it isn't happening. And I think a lot of people need to think about that for a second. I mean, here in Montana, since 1950, our temperatures have warmed 2.7 degrees. That's just trackable, right? That is faster than the national average, what we're seeing here in Montana. And that is going to impact our winters. It's going to impact when runoff occurs, how big runoff is. Spring, it gets warmer faster. In August, things are hotter and longer than it used to be. Earlier snowmelt leads to lower summer flows, warmer water temperatures, reduces dissolved oxygen, and it stresses fish, right? So you've got these changes in climate that are having a major impact on the Big Hole throughout the Jefferson Valley, but really all throughout Montana and the Northern Rockies. Let's talk about that for a second, because that's a big one.
Yeah, I think the big thing is, like you said, it's getting warmer sooner in the spring.
Yeah.
And so even if we do have a massive snowpack, it can melt out so much faster because what are we, the 12th of May right now? Mm-hmm. And we've had 2 rain events since we started on April 1st. So we're not seeing the precip. We're not adding to the snowpack during that time of year right now. And it's getting warmer and warmer in the spring. So April was way warmer than I've seen it in a long time. We had 75 degrees yesterday on the river. And so that snowpack's melting. The summers are staying hotter longer into the fall, like you were talking about with the Saprolegnia event in 2014. Yep. What were the water temps that year during the spawn?
Yeah, they were the air temperatures were in the upper 70s and 80s. Yeah, so we were above optimal. Yeah.
And that time of year, being a freestone, our water's typically a little lower, and so it can warm up a lot faster. And then it impacts what's going on with the spawn.
Yeah. And we look at snowpacks, like this year is a great example, and we were over 100% in most of these area watersheds. We all pay attention to that here in Montana. That's a big deal for us. And so we go into, late March or April, and we're pretty optimistic. But then you have, let's say, a Memorial Day where you get temps into the high 80s or 90s. That snowpack goes away really quickly, and we're right back in a problem situation.
Yeah, instead of trickling out, it just runs off all at once. Yeah. And because we don't have a reservoir in the Big Hole, it just flows through the system.
I gave a presentation the other night to our Trout Unlimited group, and we're really fortunate on the Big Hole. We have some of the best flow data that there is. It's the most gauged river in all of Montana, but it also goes back to the 20s. We have flow data from back in the 20s, and the Dust Bowl happened late 20s, early 30s, and you look at that flow data, and it's like, whoa, yeah, you can see every year was way down there in the basement. But from the 20s through the end of the 70s, there wasn't ever anything like that. You have one bad year, and then you're followed by decent years, and then one bad year. And then from the 80s to the present day, every 10 years, we get a 10-year drought. We get a Dust Bowl every 10 years. And so that's the really difficult thing from a fish's perspective, is that consistent reproduction. You can go through a bad year or two, that's fine. But when you have 5 of them in a row and you don't have really good reproduction any of those 5 years, then all of a sudden things look really, really bad in your fishery. We see that particularly like in the Jefferson. We see that quite a bit where prolonged drought has a significant impact on those fish. The Big Hole in the past has been fairly resilient to that because we're a little more towards the headwaters, and our flows tend to be a little bit better. But it's real. Like, that is a real thing that is going on, and if that's the consistent pattern, we need to start thinking. Not as just a fishing industry or as an agency, but as a culture together. Like, do we want these fisheries to continue in the future? And if we do, we need to probably start thinking about some bigger solutions to help us combat those, because we can't make it rain more. We can't keep the temperature around, but there may be options to help slow that water down and provide some flow when we desperately need it. So.
And those are issues that are going to impact all Western fisheries. Yep. That's not just the Big Hole. I mean, that's rivers throughout all the Western states. And when you get those Dust Bowl years, as you call them, when you get those low water, high temp years, I mean, you're also, introducing more disease. I mean, more stressors on the fish, and that's going to have an impact no matter what river you're fishing on. So big picture thinking there for sure, and something that as a sport, we can't ignore that. We just can't. We can't be, passionate anglers and pretend that that's not happening, because it is. There's no question. Well, let me ask you guys this, shifting gears just a little bit. What role is agriculture, particularly irrigation for hay and ranching in the Big Hole Valley and throughout kind of this whole part of Montana, what role is agriculture playing in the trout population decline? I know that's politically a tricky one, obviously, when it comes to water usage, but let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, for our area, it's mainly cattle ranching. And to raise cattle, they need to feed them during the wintertime when the ground's covered in snow. So they grow hay and alfalfa, and they need water to grow alfalfa in the hay, and the water comes from the river. And I mean, I wish that it didn't take water to grow hay, but it does. And so there's irrigation draw from the river, lowering the river from where it would be naturally without the draw, and causing more stress on the fish because the water's lower and the temperatures are warmer.
And that's just a fact. I mean, that's water rights
that's everywhere. That's
since,
not just in our area. That's not Southwest Montana. That's everywhere. Everywhere that there is irrigation, there's decline in the river.
Yeah. Well, are there examples of ranchers working effectively with conservation groups, especially in the Big Hole Valley, or voluntarily kind of returning water to the river, trying to mitigate that draw off that can have a negative impact? I mean, how's that happened in the valley?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a drought management plan, which the Big Hole Watershed Committee has fronted, in its development and maintenance through time, and that's exactly what it does. Is it asks ranchers, when we get to certain flow triggers, to limit their withdrawal. Just so you know, those water rights are a private property right. It's their right, just like the ground is, they have a deed to their ground. They have a deed, basically, that same sort of concept to that water. So everything that they're giving up, when we talk about this, it's voluntary. They don't have to do that. When the water's low, there's more water rights in the river, probably 3 times as much water as there is in the river. And so it could be completely dry, and that would be completely legal for them to do that. They don't do that, of course, because they want to be good stewards, and these sorts of things are good for them too. The value of some of these ranches is astronomical now, and that has nothing to do with the amount of hay or cows that they can produce. It has to do with them where they're at. They're located on the river, and it's the value of that fishery and that goes along with that produces the value to their land. And so this plan works, or it exists, and it does work. In 2021, it was a really, really bad water year, and worse almost than it was in 1988, which is the previous worst water year. And we had more than 100 CFS at Melrose due to that drought plan than we did in 88. And so it certainly works, and it's all voluntary. And but it's also a shared sacrifice model in the sense of, so when ranchers are asked to give up, we also place fishing restrictions, so the fishing industry also is giving up at the same time. So it's not just asking ranchers, it's asking other people whose livelihood also depends on that water to be giving up at the same time. And honestly, I think that's why it works. I mean, obviously there's always going to be contention between fishing and ranching because we both depend on that water. But the idea of the shared sacrifice where both sides are giving up for the overall good of the river, it has worked.
What things are being done to put more water or keep water in the rivers? I mean, tributary restoration, beaver mimicry, conifer encroachment mitigation. I mean, are all of these things playing a role as well, in addition to just the willingness of ranchers to keep more water in the river? Yeah,
those things, they're there as well. And a lot of things that we've done, too, is to help replace old infrastructure. A lot of the what are head gates, which is where the water's diverted from the river, are 50, 60, 70 years old. They're made out of wood, and they're kind of half falling apart. And so once they open those up, they really have no way to close those down either. So if they wanted to reduce their withdrawals, they can't because the infrastructure isn't in place. They don't have a turn wheel that they could turn to close that gate and slow down their withdrawals. And so part of it has been that too, where we've helped to replace some of their infrastructure so that when we do call for water, that they can give that up. The other thing we've been doing too is working with irrigators who are on or near tributaries, because the water coming out of the mountains is cold. And a lot of times those streams that are coming out as they come to the big hole get dewatered or nearly dewatered. And so that cold water is going out onto the field, whereas the river can be warmer than those streams are. And so we're working on projects where we can flip-flop that water, where they can divert either through a pump or some other means from the big hole and allow that cold water to come into the river. And that not only helps the temperatures of the river, but it also helps for connectivity of fish. So a lot of times fish will go and seek out colder places when the river gets warm. And so having access to those, because now there's good flow coming through that tributary all the way to the river, now those fish can move into that tributary during the 3 or 4 weeks when it's the worst conditions in the river.
I think a lot of listeners might not realize how complicated and complex this whole network is. There's so much going on there, without question. How about nutrient loads, algae blooms? How does that tie into trout health when it comes to like oxygen depletion? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this has been something that the Big Hole River Foundation has looked at more closely. We just haven't ever considered that. From a biological perspective, you usually don't worry about oxygen in a river. Riffles mix the water, that happens, and so usually we're at what we would call saturation. As much oxygen as that water can hold, that's how much is in a river. And so through some of their work, though, we've seen more recently that particularly during these dry years in the upper part of the river where there's few riffles and we get really large amounts of algae, we've seen our oxygen levels go to below the levels that are tolerable for most fish, or for trout in particular. And that's been kind of new and surprising to us. And some of those things we don't fully understand yet, or what their impacts are, because really this is brand new information. We've never really considered it being an issue for trout rivers in the West. And so what the total impact, what the impacts are that on the fish, I don't know yet, because it's pretty new information.
But it's being studied.
Yes, it's being studied. Yep.
How about macroinvertebrate declines, as far as the aquatic insects, everything from the tiny mayflies to salmon flies, let's say the big stoneflies. Are they an ongoing concern in the Big Hole and throughout the Jefferson Valley? Is this something that's being studied as well?
Yeah, that's something that we don't look at that close. Bugs are really hard. They're difficult. And Eric can probably speak to hatches and things and that sort of thing, what he's seen through time too. But the one thing I can tell you about that is that our fish are in better shape than they've ever been. And that probably has more to do with their numbers. Lower numbers, there's just more food available for them. And so as far as what's going on with the bugs and are we seeing declines in that, the Big Hole River Foundation has been collecting bugs. We just don't have a very long-term data set, and bugs are really difficult to interpret too, because they're cyclical and we don't understand those cycles and what drives those cycles very well at all. At least that's how I understand it. But my understanding of that field is pretty limited too. I took aquatic entomology in college, 30 years ago or whatever, not 30, but close to it. But that's it. So that's not my real area of expertise. But Eric can probably speak to the hatches more.
I mean, we've definitely seen, anecdotally, what looks like a decline. Not seeing as many salmon flies as we used to. The hatch doesn't seem to last quite as long. Same thing with golden stones, fewer. This year we had a good squallow year, which we hadn't seen in quite a while, and because of that, the fishing was phenomenal this year, and had some great dry fly opportunities for most of April into the first day or two of May. But same thing with trichos. Trichos last year didn't see nearly as many as we usually do. PMDs seem a little lighter. I've only been there for 20 years, but I talked to some of the people that were there 20 years before me, and they talk about salmon flies just being smashed on the windshield as you're driving down the highway. And I've never seen it like that, but I definitely have noticed that since I've been there, there's not as many bugs as there were when I started.
We seem to be hearing that with a lot of the Western fisheries, though.
Yeah.
And that certainly isn't just Southwest Montana. That's a concern with so many Western rivers, is
Right.
the health of the aquatic insects and the numbers.
Yeah.
And, the decline or the challenges that we're dealing with there. That's, as you said, Jim, is a study in and of itself. That's a whole different language almost, but certainly something that our industry is starting to pay more and more attention to, for sure. Yeah. Eric, let me ask you this. Shifting gears away from kind of the environmental challenges and the naturally occurring conditions, how much of the decline, or I won't even call it decline, let's say the fluctuation in fish numbers, do you think can be attributed to fishing pressure versus environmental concerns? And I would say that especially during kind of some of the peak summer times when you see the most anglers. What's your 20 years as far as what you've seen there? What are your thoughts on just angling pressure and the effects that has?
I'm not sure how much angling pressure has directly on the population. I mean, of course, people can catch a fish, handle it poorly, and it dies. But I think the occurrence of that isn't very high. One of the things that when you're talking about like total angler pressure, last year was the least amount of people I'd seen on the river since I've been there. Go ahead.
And Eric and I have had this conversation previously too, that if angling, because there is a lot of angling pressure, so we monitor that. We have a mailback survey, and we get angler estimates from the river. So it's not just it's anybody fishing. It's not just somebody who's commercially using the river. It's anybody fishing the river, and it's been a steady incline for the last since we've been collecting these sorts of data. But the big hole, compared to other rivers, in the total number of people that fish it, it's compared to the Madison, for example, it's way lower than what the Madison sees for fishing pressure. And so if angling is having an impact on the fishery, it's angling and something else. It's not going to be just angling, because other places that, like I said, the Missouri, the Madison get way more fishing pressure than the Big Hole does. But the Big Hole also gets low and it gets warm. And so if angling is having an impact on the overall fishing population, or the fish population, it's probably going to be angling and something else. And those are things that we can manage around too. If that is actually something, we don't see that signature in the data, but we're taking a much closer look at that now too, through part of these studies, is looking really, really close at that sort of thing. So I think we'll have some better information on that in the future, but that's what my gut says. If it's angling, it's got to be angling and river temperature or flows, that sort of thing. Yeah,
and like last year when we had fewer people on the river, we would have seen maybe an incline in population. Instead, we saw a slight decline in a couple spots.
Exactly.
And so it's hard to correlate angling pressure to that.
Yeah. And one thing that's interesting, and I think a lot of people don't realize, is that guides and outfitters, the commercial element of fly fishing versus just the public recreational use or pressure that's put on a river, there are practices that are routinely put in place to help conserve fish, whether it is kind of self-induced practices where they say, hey, we're just monitoring temperatures on our own. We're going to fish our clients earlier. We're going to get off earlier. We're going to, not worry about going out and catching 40 fish a day, but maybe being happy with fewer fish in a shorter day. Sometimes that's self-induced. Sometimes it's the state dictates it through hoot owl and practices that are put in place to help protect these fish numbers. But what do you think, Eric, responsible guiding looks like today when you factor all that in?
Yeah, it's about taking care of the fish and the fishery. And we mentioned hoot owl. So, we do self-imposed hoot owl before the state regulates it. All of our guides have thermometers. We're watching the water temperatures. We go out early. We leave, instead of meeting at 9 or 8, we meet at 6. Go out a couple hours earlier so we can get off the water by 1:30, 2 o'clock. If they don't want to go out quite that early, we shorten the day. And we still have an enjoyable day out there, catch plenty of fish, but try to take care of the trout. And you talk about some of the imposed stuff. So on the Big Hole, we have a special use permit. So that means there's only so many permittees that can fish the river. And if you do have a permit, you're regulated during June and July how many boats you can launch during that 2-month period. And so we also have guide rest rotation on the river. So there's a section of the river closed to commercial angling every day of the week, and it rotates. And then we also have launch restrictions. As an outfitter, we're only able to launch 2 boats per access site per day on the big hole. And so all of these things are put in place, whether they're mandatory by FWP or voluntary by us, that we're trying to do to protect these fish and not overutilize the resource.
Well, a lot of that can be tracked and monitored when you look at the commercial element of fishing on a river like the Big Hole. Because as you said, I mean, you're filing your river logs, your reports, the state looks at it, you've got those special use permits. It's kind of easy to monitor and track the commercial aspect of fly fishing on these rivers or sport fishing. How can the angling community, the non-commercial element that is putting, a high degree of pressure on these river resources as well, how can the general angling community be more proactive when it comes to trout recovery efforts or pressure that's put onto these resources?
I mean, it's just being safe with your fishing practices, how you handle the fish, when you fish, how often you fish. Like, it's taking care of the resource. Like, if you catch a fish, try to keep it wet. If you want to get a photograph, try to make it quick, get it right back in the water. Don't just dump the boat or the fish in the boat and let it flop around for a minute. Keep it in the net. Keep it wet. Try to release it quickly. One thing that Jim and FWP did was they made it single hook on the Big Hole during this time of the trout population decline. And so now there's no treble hooks on the Big Hole. And they made things catch and release only on the Big Hole. And so those are more things that have been put in place to try to help protect the fish.
One thing that we talk about a lot on this podcast and a lot of these different episodes is thinking about how you fish as an angler too, and kind of your philosophies. When you go out into the river, is the goal to go out and, do you have to catch 30 fish in a day or 40 fish? I mean, do you have to, nymph through a run or Euro fish it and catch every single fish that's in there? Or can you go out and be happy, throwing a dry and maybe not catching as many fish, but having a little different experience? And when you think about the impact it has on the resource, especially during these tough summer months when flows are low or temps are high, that can make a huge difference as well. And maybe adjusting your philosophies on how you are going out and fishing and what you need to, measure a successful day.
Yeah, and one thing our staff does a lot of is we do longer floats and just keep moving. We don't sit and recirculate a hole as much. Sometimes we'll do that for sure. But we think by just kind of, a lot of times we throw a dry dropper rig and we just kind of move through. You hit a hole, you catch a fish, great, you move on. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with having a 40, 50 fish day. But if you can do it just by moving down the river, hit a hole, hit it on the run, you double up, great. You don't get one, well, let's move to the next hole. Let's keep it going.
Yeah, not pounding the hell out of one productive run for sure. Well, Jim, let me ask you this. We talked about some of the things that have been put in place, some of the measures that the state enacted when numbers were down, whether it was, October closure or catch and release regulations, the single hook, artificial gear restrictions. Do you believe that, for instance, with the Big Hole, that is the new norm? Are we going to see those regulations stay in place for the health of the fishery? Or do you think it's like, oh, numbers are back up, we're more positive, now we're going to relax those regulations? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so we've come up with an adaptive management plan that we have in place for the Big Hole, the Ruby, and the Beaverhead. And it does exactly that. It adjusts right now what we can control, and what's in the plan are regulations, so that when we are low, we are way more restrictive. But as we have it as like a stop signal. So it's red, yellow, and green. We're managing for the green. We want to be in the middle. That produces the best balance of both size and numbers of fish to have a steady fishery. And right now in the upper section, we're in the red, and in the lower section, we're in the yellow for the Big Hole. But yeah, when we go into the green, our regulations are generally liberalized. The thing is most people practice the exact what's in place now, except for maybe being able to fish in the wintertime. Most people, 90%, 99% of people are catch and release. 99% of people are fishing with flies. It's kind of self-regulated a little bit in that way. But one thing we have found when things do get good is that they can get too good. And so having a whole lot of fish in the river is also detrimental to the overall health, especially long-term health of the fishery. That's when we had our big die-off, is when we had the most brown trout we've ever had, 1,900 a mile in the big hole. And that year we got that estimate, that's when we had the die-off. And so we kind of might have to change our thinking a little bit to like not, having more fish isn't always great either. So liberalizing the regulations to allow those people, which aren't very many people, to keep some fish can be beneficial to the river. When we're above our objectives, that can keep us from crashing the population. That's how wildlife is managed, more closely that way, to regulate their numbers to prevent die-offs in the wintertime like they do sometimes happen for elk or mule deer. We're trying that same sort of technique. It's just not very many people, very, very limited number of people actually keep fish from our rivers to eat. But that is expected. That's in our management plan, how it's written right now.
It's all about finding that balance.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot here for a second, Jim.
Okay.
In your opinion, is Montana's regulatory framework currently strong enough to protect its rivers looking into the future?
Yeah, I don't know if like the history of some of our rivers, but Dick Vincent was the original Madison biologist who came up with the numbers and stuff that backed up the idea that we should stop stocking our rivers. And I have a quote from him. It's like, we need to stop talking about regulations and start talking about habitat. Regulations likely have a very limited effect on what's going on for our fish. It's all about habitat. And habitat being water in this case, that's why the Madison's been incredibly resilient. They're not seeing the things that we're seeing because they don't have the low water years like that we have. It's kind of a freestone system. I mean, it has Hebgen Lake and some other lakes on it, but they're managed mostly for hydropower, and so they have good flows, and that makes for a good, stable fishery. And so I think our framework is fine. I think that part is fine. I think we're looking forward. What we need to be focused on is water and creating consistent water that we can protect in the river. We can't take it from ranchers. That's not going to happen. They give up what they give up voluntarily. But if we can come up with ways that we can have water for fish and be able to protect that water in the river for fish that other people can't take, I think those are the long-term strategies that we really need to be thinking about, because that's the main driver is water. And we don't have the tools, in my opinion, to be able to have flows for fish. And that takes bigger thinking than a little fish biologist in Butte can do. But I think that's the way we need to be thinking. If these long-term droughts are going to be part of how our rivers function, we need to be coming up with long-term solutions to keep water in the rivers during those times.
Well, you mentioned something a moment ago about Montana's current policies and philosophies on naturally producing wild fish. There are some lawmakers today in Helena that have suggested restarting the stocking program in Montana's rivers, saying, our numbers are down, whether it's this river, that watershed. It's easy. We'll just dump in a bunch of hatchery fish, which is what most states do. Kind of an easy solution to the problem to get the numbers up for sportsmen. But do you think this is seriously being considered? I mean, is there a danger of this, in Montana for the future?
I hope not. All of the data says that we should not do that. But we are a state agency that is mandated to do things. If we're told to do so, that's what we do. But that is not what the data support. The data support that wild fisheries produce a better fishery, more consistent, more fish, better fish.
Healthier fish,
exactly. And it's not something that we as an agency would ever, I think, even consider. it would have to come from someplace else that we're told we have to do that.
Well, it's good for our listeners. Pay attention to that. Pay attention to what the legislators in Helena are doing, and speak up and speak out for wild fish. That is what makes Montana's rivers so special. There's no doubt about it. Well, let me ask you a question right now, Eric. Back to you. We're just kind of at the start of your busy guide season, but You've already been on the water pretty much every day. What are you seeing so far for the 2025 season? How has the fishing been for you?
2025 has been really, really good so far. We've had really good stable flows. We didn't have much of an ice-off event, so we've had pretty good water clarity, pretty stable flows. I mean, it's going up really hard right now, but it still fished really well yesterday, even through the bump. The trout we're seeing, a lot of different age classes, they look good. They just look healthy. Every fish that we're catching, not every fish, but most of the fish that we're catching have like a really good body score. They look great. They're fighting hard, and it seems like there's a good number of them. When these numbers came out from Jim's sampling this year, we were all surprised. We thought we were going to see a massive increase. We're like, man, the fish look good. We're catching lots of fish. And so it kind of goes back to, we're guides. We're on the river all the time. We're really good at catching fish. But if this decline was so bad that we weren't catching fish, we would notice. And it would be obvious to us. That's not what we're seeing. We're seeing really good, healthy fish, and in good numbers too.
And I'll put this question to both of you guys. Yeah. What is giving you hope right now for the season ahead, for the years ahead? Are the recent reports of recovery in the rivers and the age classes, is it something that you expect to continue, or is it just completely up to Mother Nature and the climate effects, or are there things that are giving you hope right now?
I mean, I think the fact that we're all talking about it, that we're sitting in this room, there's going to be people listening to this episode, that's giving me hope, because it's going to get more people involved. And we think about the work that organizations like the Watershed Committee are doing, and taking care of some of the conifer encroachment, some of the beaver mimicry that they're doing, getting all these people involved in doing things that are beneficial for the river, which in turn is beneficial for the water and water quality. Keeping clean, cold water in the river is what it's about. And the more people that are listening, the more people that get involved, I think that's hope. And that's going to help give us better fisheries for future generations.
And that's something I think you can apply to rivers all throughout the West. Yeah. It's not just the story of the Big Hole. I mean, that's the story of every river that people are connected to, and that they're fishing, and that is supporting an infrastructure of the fly fishing business, but also that gives us enjoyment when we as anglers just go out and fish on our own. Yeah. I mean, that's it. That's the story.
Yeah, I think what I am optimistic most about is these studies that are going on are going to. We haven't ever taken a really deep dive into the amount of data that we have and what those data are correlated with. That can tell us then, well, does fishing pressure really matter, or does it, or is it all water, or is it temperature? What are the things that matter the most? And then once we have that information, then what do we do about it? Then we can develop management strategies. Right now, like I said, our management plan is really focused on regulations, but we don't think regulations are what's driving it. What we hope to see is our management plan says, well, if we're down here, we should do this. We need to get this much CFS in this sort of year to get the type of recruitment that we need to sustain that fishery for the next 4 or 5 years. That's the cool thing that I like, that I'm really, really excited about. So we're able to start to quantify some of these things to say, how much water do we need? You know, our drought plan says that we should stop fishing when we're at 150 CFS. Well, how much more do we need? Is 5 more CFS that beneficial, or is it 200 more CFS? What really matters? And so when we have those informations, we're better armed as an agency to start to tackle what some of these issues are, and leave some of these issues behind that we've fought about over, which may not matter at all to the fish, and focus on what really matters. And I think that's the part that excites me the most, because I think we're going to get some information and ideas and management strategies that are going to be way more impactful for fish than some of the stuff that we're focused on now.
And then I think listening to the data, and that's the thing, not taking the doom and gloom and scaring the public and sensationalizing it for clicks. Listen to the data. If there's something to celebrate, let's celebrate it. If there's something that's going down, let's work together and let's talk about it, and let's not scare people. And I think that being honest about it is important, but also not freaking out about it and being pragmatic about how we go about fixing things and continuing to take care of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, applies to so many areas, for sure. Well, Eric, let me ask you this. For the fly fishermen that are listening to this episode, they're like, okay, this has been great. I've learned a lot. There's hope. That's all good. But I want to head to the big hole this summer and fish.
Yeah.
What is my trip going to be like? Can you kind of tell us, for anglers planning to fish the big hole or the Beaverhead or anything in kind of the Jefferson watershed, what do you think anglers have to look forward to this summer? What can they realistically expect in terms of river health, fish numbers? I'm looking to the next couple months.
I think that we're going to have a great summer. I mean, we have more water than we had last year. We have better snowpack. We're coming into a nice, cool pattern for the next week. We're supposed to get some rain, supposedly get some snow in the mountains. And so that's going to help stop that melt. Hopefully have a nice trickle out of the snow out of the mountains. The fish look healthy. I think it's going to be a great summer. I mean, it's hard to predict. You've been here long enough too, Yeah. But I mean, what we've seen so far this year is a really good indicator for what I think the rest of the summer is going to look like. The hatches have looked good so far. I mean, we've got Mother's Day caddis going off right now. They started a little earlier than we're used to, so we might see the hatches come a little earlier. So maybe see the salmon flies maybe June 1 instead of June 7. That's maybe something that we'll see. But again, all of this is so difficult to predict. But I know if you come out, you're going to see one of the most beautiful rivers in the state, one of the least developed rivers in the state, a freestone that's just stunningly gorgeous with so many different sections. You got the lower river, more braided, more cottonwood. You got the canyon section with high canyon walls, just absolutely stunning. And then if you make it out there and you want to float the upper river, you got to come out now and into June. But it's almost like a giant spring creek. It's just amazing how dynamic this river is, and it's fishing. Go enjoy yourself, have a good time, and just be happy being in Montana.
That's right. Good advice. No doubt. Well, let me ask this to the both of you guys. What can the average angler, whether they're a local that's very connected to these resources or, a visiting tourist that, likes to make their annual trip to the Northern Rockies or specifically to Montana, what can the average angler do to help? How can anyone who's listening to this program get involved or stay more connected to this issue and, make an impact with some positive change?
I mean, one thing, self-servingly, go support local fly shops. That definitely can help. Make donations to organizations like Big Hole Watershed Committee. The boots on the ground work that they're doing, and I would love to hear you talk a little bit about some of the stuff up at Mount Hagen. Mm-hmm. It's remarkable how much they did, and they need money and they need support, and that's something that people, even if you're not coming here all the time, you come here once a year, twice a year, once every 10 years. I mean, you can always help.
Yeah, I would just echo that. Being a conservation-minded angler is part of that. But, some of these solutions require pretty big, or some of these problems require pretty big solutions that are costly. And, to replace a head gate is $30,000 or $40,000 for a smaller one, and there's just not money to do that. And this rancher can't turn off their head gate once they turn it on. They want to contribute, they want to help, they want to slow down their withdrawal of water, but they physically can't do it until the flows are low enough that they can, have their hired man wade down in the ditch and not get swept away and start putting some boards into it. And so some of the things like that, and those take money. And like I said, some of the funding sources for that are not good. And particularly with what's going on federally right now, they're gone. They're non-existent. And so where the money's going to come from to help do some of these projects, it's going to have to come through organizations like that. So, and the Big Hole Watershed Committee has been very, very effective at working with landowners, working with us, and and other stakeholders in the watershed to accomplish those sorts of projects. They didn't happen, and they have dedicated staff to that. That's the one thing about myself. I would love to just like leave everything else that I have to do behind and do projects like that, but I can't. There's just so many other duties that I have to do with permitting and all these other sorts of things that are just part of my job, that I can't do that. But they have that luxury of being able to be really focused on some projects and get those projects done and on the ground, and it works. They've been able to do some really cool stuff that have affected both temperature and flow and those sorts of things, and yeah, they've been very effective.
Any closing thoughts for us, guys, that we want to leave our listeners with before we sign off? Anything we didn't cover or you think is important to mention?
I just want to reiterate that this is a healthy fishery, and all of the stuff that came out, New York Times article, all the other things. Yes, there was a lot of truth to a lot of that, but a lot of it was blown out of proportion. We have a very healthy fishery. We have a trout decline in population right now, but we're managing that. We're working with that. We need water, and hopefully we can get more water this year, and we'll see, like Jim was saying, those numbers can double in 1 year. And just understand that it's a great fishery. It's a great place to be, and maybe take a step back from some of the sensationalism and look at the real data and look at where we're at and come see it for yourself.
Yeah, I'm optimistic. Our numbers are still low, below long-term average. But I'm optimistic, like I said, with the studies and things that are going on about our future and our potential to manage and focus on those things that are most important to the fishery as far as developing management strategies. That part's very, very exciting to me. There's also some really nice fish in the river right now. Low density makes for big fish.
I think that's really amazing. You're showing us a photo right now on your laptop of an absolutely gorgeous brown trout caught. Where? On the big hole. Yeah, on the big hole. That's the answer. Yeah.
I talked to Eric. He knows he can recognize that spot, I'm sure. But no, there are some really, really nice fish. Lower densities just make for nicer fish. That fish is just under 30 inches long,
Oh my God.
And we don't see fish like that in the springtime very often that are that healthy, fat, nice looking fish. But
when was this fish caught?
That was caught in March.
Of this year.
Yeah. No, we got to make sure this was electrofish, not caught.
Yeah,
the river was closed on April 1st.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's in the system.
Yeah, but this weekend we had a customer come in. He fished on Friday, and on Friday night came in and showed us a picture of a 26-inch brown that they'd got just below divide.
Wow.
Yeah. The big hole's kind of unique for that. I don't know why it produces the size of fish that it does, but it just some giant fish every now and again are caught on the river. And with lower densities, there's a lot of fish that are, I can't catch them. I don't know how to catch them, but other than electricity, but they're there.
I would say you do know how to get them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So, I would say unlikely that the New York Times anytime soon will be doing a follow-up piece that talks about some of the positive things going on today, some of the new numbers and some of the optimism that I think you guys have done a great job of sharing with us. So barring the New York Times doing a follow-up piece, any resources you guys can recommend for anglers that want more information on the current state of things, or where they can go to get more kind of a realistic perspective on the health of the fishery, the current condition of the river, of again, why they should come out and experience it for themselves. Any resources you guys can recommend?
We on our website we have a link to the studies that are going on the river right now, and how you can report a tagged fish if you catch a tagged fish and that sort of thing. And it also has the most current numbers and that sort of not just for the big hole, but for the beaverhead and the ruby and the Jefferson. So all those numbers and things are on FWP's website.
What is that site for our listeners?
It's
fwp.mt.gov.
There you go.
All right, fwp.mt.gov.
And if you're local and in Montana and you get an opportunity to go see when Jim speaks in the spring, he does a kind of state of the river every year. And he does one for the Watershed Committee, does one for TU up in Butte. Yep. Is there any other one you guys do down in Dillon?
No, that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are well worth visiting if you get a chance.
Well, and I would add one more resource. Are the fly shops. Stop in to the local fly shops or give them a call. Find out what's happening because, when you have guides and outfitters and the shops like Eric's, that is a resource that is, these guys have their finger on the pulse better than anybody. They're out there every day. They can tell you what's fishing, what's happening, what the current state of the river is, what the water flows are, and use that. I mean, that's the greatest things about fly shops is they are so connected to their resource. How about a website for you, Eric?
Sunriseflyshop.com.
There you go. And people can give you a call and find out what's going on.
Can I say a little bit about that? Because with these studies going on right now, a lot of them are relying on tagged fish and getting tags back from people. So as they catch a tagged fish, they clip it off. But we've had and also people are interviewed like every day on the river by creel surveys. And our creel survey folks have said the outfitters have been very, very cooperative. This is like at the end of their day, and they get stopped by some kid who asks them 400 questions about everything and they've been very, very good. And in fact, they've collected the tagged information from us. So we've had very good, not with all outfitters, of course, but especially our local guys have been very, very good to work with on this study. So it's that's been good, a very positive thing. So.
Great. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today.
Much. Yeah. Really, really appreciate you having us on.
I know I've learned a lot, without question. I mean, it's great. And Jim, thank you for the scientific information from FWP's perspective. Eric, it's good to hear what you're finding every day on the river. And it looks to be a good season ahead, for sure.
Yeah, it definitely does.
It's been good having you guys here. And, I guess one closing thought that I'll leave everybody with is that Montana's trout aren't just the foundation of our fishing economy. They're central to the identity and heritage of this state. The Big Hole, the Ruby, the Jefferson, these rivers matter, and we all have a stake in their future, whether you live in this area or you just visit every so often and get to experience it firsthand. My special thanks to our guests today, Jim and Eric, for joining us, and to everyone listening who's committed to protecting and sustaining wild trout and the waters they call home. No doubt about it. And that is it for this latest episode of Waypoints. Gentlemen, thanks again for joining us. For our listeners, be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com to plan and research trips, source gear, equipment, and flies for your next destination, and stay up to date and dialed in on the latest news in fly fishing, travel, and adventure. Join us for our next episode, and remember, life is short and no one ever regretted a life of adventure.
This has been another episode of Waypoints, the podcast of fly fishing travel and adventure angling. Waypoints is produced by Brian Gregson and written by Jim Klug. Music is written and provided by bluegrass legend Woody Platt. Audio engineered by Sean McCormick. Visit yellowdogflyfishing.com for more location profiles, destination information, travel news, and the industry's best selection of flies and equipment for destination angling.